Welcome to the future. PBS Digital.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Lost Louisiana. What's in a Name, Part 4. I'm your host, Charlie Winham. For many years at LPB, we have traveled the countryside looking for towns with unusual names and asked that simple question, how did that town get their name? This time out, we set our sights on 5 Louisiana communities, towns like Plain Dealing, Bogalusa, Thibodaux, and Eunice, as well as the town I'm in right now, Opelousas, Louisiana, the Zydeco music capital of the world and spice capital of Louisiana. But we begin with a community that has hosted some of the biggest names in the music industry for over 30 years. That town is Bogalusa, Louisiana. Bogalusa features one of the best music recording studios in the country. And entertainers like Stevie Wonder, Jimmy Buffett, and Gatemouth Brown are just some of the stars to set foot in this paper mill town.
In Washington Parish, there is a community with a factory in the city and a studio in the country. Welcome to Bogalusa, the mill town that understands the importance of paper as well as a little bit of gold and platinum. But before we talk about tall pine trees and towering music stars, how did Bogalusa get its name?
Well, the story we hear is that it was an Indian name from the area, and the first settlers understood it to be Bogalusa, and it was Bogue, it's 2 different words, B-O-G-U-E, Lusa, L-U-S-A, and it meant smoky or dark waters. Bogue is the creek part of it, the water part of it, and Lusa was either the smoky or dark part of it. That's how it got its name, and it was incorporated. It's the only town with that name ever anywhere.
In the early 1900s, the Goodyear family of Buffalo, New York, opened the Great Southern Lumber Company and built the largest sawmill in the world for that time. The name Bogalusa was trademarked and printed on every pine board. This Bogalusa lumber was well known across the country for its exceptional quality.
It was a tent city when they first started out here, and it was a Wild West town. There's no 2 ways about it. I mean, the dogs ran loose, the pigs ran loose, there were shoot-em-ups and everything else.
That tent city would soon grow into a sophisticated jewel of the South. The Great Southern Lumber Company, with all the building supplies you could ever need, built up Bogalusa, complete with a spectacular hotel known as the Pine Tree Inn. The company also built a hospital and business district. At the highest point of land, some of the most regal homes for their time sprouted out of the pine forest. The residents were company executives and company doctors, and even the mayor of Bogalusa.
They wanted to feel like they were still in New York, I guess, with the wonderful houses because of the basements and everything. Highest point in the town, they have basements. But they wanted it to look beautiful and palatial, even though they were out in the middle of the woods. They tried to urbanize it, I suppose. At that time, they wouldn't have used that word, I don't think. But they really did try to make it into something spectacular, and it was.
Under the direction of Frank Goodyear, Charles Goodyear, and Mayor William Sullivan, the town of Bogalusa grew from 1,600 residents in 1907 to over 15,000 by 1930. Professional baseball also made its way through town. Mayor Sullivan persuaded the St. Louis Browns, now the Baltimore Orioles, to hold spring training in Bogalusa back in 1921. This Washington Parish town also was the home to the Bogalusa Y Tigers and played Negro League teams across the South. The Y stands for YMCA, which was the first sponsor of the Tigers. Players like Babyface Green, Dazzy Vance, and Stumpy Horn were recruited from colleges and high schools in neighboring states. The general manager for the paper mill would give players a job. Paper put Bogalusa on the map, but some Bogalusa natives are well known for what they've put down on paper. Pulitzer Prize-winning poet Yusef Komunyakaa was born in Bogalusa and currently teaches at Princeton University. And in the world of music, Bogalusa is the birthplace of Henry Bird, more commonly known as the legendary New Orleans piano player Professor Longhair. And the beat goes on. Just outside of town is a world-class recording facility called Studio in the Country. built in the 70s, Studio in the Country has recorded some of the biggest names in music.
The who's who of the recording industry has basically been through the studio, from Stevie Wonder to Willie Nelson to Blues Traveler to Marilyn Manson, Louisiana LaRue, the Neville Brothers, Dr. John, Alan Toussaint, Pete Fountain, Clifton Chenier, and of course Gatemouth Brown.
Along these walls are gold and platinum albums recorded at Studio in the Country. The biggest seller out of here was for the soundtrack Dirty Dancing, selling at last count 27 million copies worldwide. Inside these walls, Jimmy Buffett and the Neville Brothers worked side by side. Buffett, along with Blues Traveler, went multi-platinum here. Kansas recorded Dust in the Wind. Clifton Cheniers recorded a Grammy winner, and so did Gatemouth Brown. And perhaps this hit, recorded here by Louisiana LaRue, rings a bell. Studio in the Country has earned its spot as a top recording facility because, in part, it is one of the few studios built from the ground up.
Visually, it's an open room, but sound-wise, you're able to isolate different instruments in an open area because of an acoustic trap system above, and there are no right angles or parallel surfaces in the building.
It's the room itself. Anyone who has ever worked in here or even performed in here, they just talk about it and you can see it come across their face and they get this gleam in their eye about, oh yeah, Studio in the Country.
We've been blessed with some of the best in the world recording in this studio. And all have been happy and referred other clients to us, and you know, that's how the studio got the reputation that it has.
One hit that Studio in the Country could have done without is Hurricane Katrina. The storm damaged the roof and part of the studio, but repairs are near complete, and the studio is scheduled to reopen this spring, ready to continue where they left off.
It makes you feel real good to know that somebody in Bogalusa, Louisiana has made an impact on the entire music world, actually. I mean, really, think about it. If you look at that one award out there on Dirty Dancing, the one that has all the flags on it, each one of those flags represents a country that record went platinum in. Now imagine that, something coming out of Bogalusa, Louisiana.
The country is scheduled to reopen soon, and you might want to keep an eye out for a Louisiana band making a name. The group is the Benji Davis Project, and they have recorded 3 CDs so far at Studio in the Country. If you get the chance, give them a listen. Our next town we visit is Eunice, where music also plays a big role. You could say it is the heart and soul of this prairie Cajun community. But just as important to the Cajun culture is preserving that heritage, whether that's in the form of creating a music museum, to the preservation of a grand old theater, or even having a grandfather pass on his skills of making an accordion to his grandson.
In the heart of Cajun country is the town of Eunice. The St. Landry Parish community is also known as Louisiana's Prairie Cajun capital. So what's in a name, and how did Eunice get its name? George Emanuel of the Eunice Depot Museum has the answer.
Eunice was a name given to the founder of Eunice, and he named it after his second wife.
Eunice.
Her name was Eunice Farr. She came from a very wealthy family near Spanish Lake.
Eunice was the second wife of land speculator C.C. Dusant. On one autumn day in 1894, C.C. brought a trainload of people to this site and auctioned off plots of land. As the story goes, it turned out to be quite a little party.
I remember hearing stories of, oh yeah, my grandma said they built a big fire and they started cooking gumbo and all. They fed the people, they got them in a good mood, then he got up on the flatbed and auctioned off the lots. And of course, by this time they're here, they were interested enough to come, and they liked what they saw.
And the town of Eunice was born. This bronze statue of Eunice was unveiled for the town's 100th anniversary. And even though Eunice only lived in the town bearing her name for less than a year, the rest of the townfolk began to cultivate the Prairie Cajun culture that has been passed down from generation to generation. Larry Miller is a Cajun musician and accordion maker. He is also a founding member of the Cajun French Music Association. In 1997, the CFMA opened the Cajun Music Hall of Fame, dedicated to the men and women that created and preserved the Cajun music culture. And it's only fitting that a cornerstone to this Hall of Fame began with an accordion, played by legendary musician Aldous Roger. Back in the 80s, Larry noticed an ad in the Lafayette Classifieds stating that the accordion was for sale.
I had promised Mr. Roger that it was going to end up in the Hall of Fame.
It was really a catalyst to this museum, huh?
That's exactly right. It was what we call in French a nichoir, which is like a dummy egg that you put in a nest of a chicken nest, and that motivates the other chickens to lay. Well, this became our nichoir, and it worked. It's a very important historical presentation of these musicians who have developed and recorded the music that we now enjoy. And if we don't get pictures and biographies and recordings and artifacts, how else would our succeeding generations, after I'm dead and gone, and my generation, how will our future generations know that there was such a thing, except for a few recordings?
Passing the torch also includes passing down the skills of making melodeon accordions. And at Larry's Accordion Workshop, he's handing down this passion and knowledge to his grandson, Jay.
Thibodeaux, mais il va pas là, il va aller à Nouvelle-Écosse pour voir le basson des accordions. For 28 years, I built accordions, and I'm in the process of retiring right now from accordion building. My grandson was willing to take over the accordion building part, so he's been with me for the last 7.5, 8 years, and so he knows what he's doing, and I've willed him my accordion label, the Bon Cajun accordion label.
Another cornerstone to the town of Eunice is the old Liberty Theater. This vaudeville and silent movie house was built in 1924. The city of Eunice purchased and renovated the theater in the 80s.
Did you come to this theater as a child?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, when we came here to start the renovation, people were all excited about it and wondering about it, so they would wander in and out. And so they say, "Oh, this is my seat right here." And we said, "Great. Listen, take the your gum out from under the seat." This is the second oldest operating theater in Louisiana that is included in the National Trust Guide on Great American Movie Houses. The two, surprisingly enough, that fall behind it are the Sanger in New Orleans and the Strand in Shreveport. Okay. The Orpheum is the oldest in New Orleans.
You have a player piano in here that you could spend all day just looking at that, could you?
Absolutely. It is the original instrument that was played in the orchestra pit at the time, and by the original owners, his wife, and she accompanied the silent movies on it. There's an energy here that you really can't reproduce in a new theater. It's sort of the spirit lives on of everything that's happened here.
The Liberty Center is now the showcase to a weekly Cajun music radio and TV show known as Rendezvous des Cajuns. It has been described as part Louisiana hayride and part Prairie Home Companion.
Tell me about the Saturday night shows here.
Well, the Saturday night shows are extremely well known. We've got folks from all over the United States that have come. It's been going on since the 80s. There are bands, different Cajun bands, new, young, and upcoming bands, and old traditional bands that are famous that come here and play at very reduced fees because it's a great honor to come here. And Barry Ancelet generally serves. Dr. Barry Ancelet from ULL is generally the master of ceremonies, and he has all that great knowledge of the Cajun culture. And he's comical and addresses the crowd, and the crowd interacts, and there's dancing and all of that. It's just a great fun thing.
The spring of 2007 will mark the 1,000th performance of Rendezvous des Cajuns.
it's a way of life. Once you play, you play. And it can be a very happy medium. It can be a very sad medium. It's not like beer guzzling honky-tonk music that just is my girl stole my truck and left me. You know, this was so, I mean, this was truly sad, some of the songs and all, but it was a way of passing history on when they sang the song. So they kept it. And now there are thousands of Cajun musicians, and some of them are so good. Some of them are 14 years old and they sound like they playing music from the 1900s. It's unreal. But it's kind of like the glue that holds it all together.
When the Liberty Theater was built in 1924, it was hailed as Southwest Louisiana's premier temple of amusement. Now, Eunice is also the home to the World Championship Crawfish Etouffee Cook-Off in March and the Prairie Cajun Folklife Festival in October. For more information on Louisiana's Prairie Cajun capital, you can go online at www.eunice-la.com. We are at the halfway mark, and we have 3 more towns to go. When we come back, we will meet up with a group of plain-dealing people in northwest Louisiana. We'll also head down Bayou Lafourche to the town of Thibodaux. And of course, we'll find out more about this town, Opelousas. You're watching Lost Louisiana, What's in a Name, Part 4 on Louisiana Public Broadcasting. Welcome back to Lost Louisiana. What's in a Name, Part 4. I'm your host, Charlie Winham. I'm in the town of Opelousas, Louisiana. It was founded in 1720 and is Louisiana's 3rd oldest city. For 9 months during the Civil War, Opelousas was the capital of Louisiana. The city is comprised of many cultures, each with unique histories. Some of those stories are preserved in local cemeteries, but the spice of life rings throughout Opelousas today because this town is also home to one of the most popular spice companies created by a man named Tony.
Opelousas is a cultural gumbo that is home to many famous people, rich historical treasures, and one of the most popular spices ever made. During the late 17th century, French explorers arrived to this area, once occupied by Native Americans, which is how Opelousas got its name.
Probably from the original American native inhabitants, the Opelousas Indians, which means Blackfoot, Blackleg, and linguistically they were part of the Attakapaws. It's how the name is derived. Now, the name itself, Opelousas, probably goes back to, I would say, 1720, 1719. But then when they're talking Opelousas, it could be the Indian tribe and a very nebulous entity.
We begin our story at the St. Landry Church Cemetery with former president of the Louisiana Preservation Alliance, Ed Dubuisson.
You grew up in Opelousas.
Yeah.
This was a playground for you.
Well, not a playground exactly. I went to school over here, and we'd walk home after school and always cut through the cemetery. I found it fascinating, all these old tombs.
Ed and his childhood friends would wander around the tombs. Some go back over 200 years.
We tried to find the oldest tomb, and we were always fascinated by the lion and the lamb over here. And I later learned that the lion was my great-great-great-great-grandfather. He was governor of Louisiana, Jacques Dupré.
The former governor is represented by the lion, while his wife has the lamb over her grave. Legend has it the pair did not get along in their later years of marriage, and that only in death would the lion and the lamb sleep beside each other in peace. Another interesting marker looks more like a marble table, and it belongs to a former general in Napoleon's army. He later made Louisiana his home.
It's actually for General Garrigue de Flaujac. General Flaujac had served in Napoleon's army and gradually made his way down to Louisiana. He was actually shipwrecked at one time, made his way down to Louisiana, and saw the opportunities in the Opelousas area.
James Doguet also invited us to take a look at one of the first residences in Opelousas, the Michel Prudhomme House.
So this is the oldest house in Opelousas?
There's nothing fancy about it. In fact, I like to tell people that in times of bad weather, when the Prudhommes were raising longhorn cattle, they would actually bring the cattle inside the first floor for protection. When I go upstairs and I look at the little sitting stool made from the horns of the cattle, they were well known for raising longhorn cattle. There's lots of memories in this old house, and I think there might be more than one Prudhomme still walking around from yesteryear.
And bringing yesteryear to life is in the able hands of 84-year-old artist J.A. Allen. J.A. is known for his thousands of sketches of the Opelousas landscape and buildings over the centuries. Many of those St. Landry Parish buildings no longer exist.
You really enjoy drawing?
It makes me real happy to sit down and do something that's creative, you know. It's just in my blood.
One of his most popular works is a Cajun coloring book that teaches children French. But thanks to J.A., he gave his hometown an identity that is seen everywhere.
I designed the Opelousas City Seal, and it's been printed probably millions of times. The police department, the sheriff department, the fire department, they all use that seal on their uniforms. So I'm really proud of the Opelousas City Seal, and that's my legacy for the city of Opelousas, Opelousas City Seal.
The city seal is not the only successful branding of Opelousas. Take this hugely popular spice called Tony Chachere's Original Creole Seasoning, known by many simply as Tony's. This spice was created in Opelousas by legendary insurance salesman and recreational chef Tony Chachere. His oldest grandson, Don, now oversees the business.
He loved to cook. That was his passion. That, hunting and fishing and selling. He had a lot of passions. A lot of people don't realize, if you look at the little caricature on the man, it's a caricature of my grandfather, and it's a little small caricature. But what you don't realize is the man behind that caricature is nothing but small. He's 6'3", 220 pounds. He was a big man even at the age of 89. He was a very lovable character because whenever you saw him, he always had a great big grin. And that made him a master salesman. He's in the Equitable Hall of Fame for being one of the best producers for life insurance. He was a great salesman.
The town of Opelousas boasts a laundry list of famous people. Some of the folks that are part of the Opelousas Hall of Fame include Zydeco musicians Clifton Chenier and rockin' Sidney Simeon, cooking legends Enola and Paul Prudhomme, even legendary Jim Bowie, the man who popularized the Bowie knife called Opelousas home. He lived in the area for nearly 20 years. Bowie served as a co-commander of the Texan forces at the Alamo and died at the battle scene along with Davy Crockett at age 39. The story of Opelousas cannot be said in just a matter of minutes. What makes this area special is not simply the diverse cultures or rich history, it is also the scores of residents who strive to discover and preserve these family stories for future generations.
So as you can see, it's still a work in progress, as genealogy is. You're still digging and working, and that's the good part with Opelousas being the third oldest city. We have the graveyards here. We have the courthouse with all the probates.
It's one of the early urban nodes where, you know, this point of European civilization started. And again, we have to look at the topography, the people, the very unique culture we have here. And it's unlike any other place in the United States.
Good night. Good night.
The Tony Chachere's product line has grown. What once started with containers of Tony's Creole seasoning has now heated up to feature over 100 items in their latest catalog. You can get everything from turducken to frozen dinners and stuffing. You can even order a Tony Chachere stainless steel smoker. Our next stop takes us down Bayou Lafourche and the town of Thibodaux. Now, Thibodaux was a town that was fit for a Spanish queen, even though she never ended up there. Now, some of the residents of Thibodaux consider their town the prettiest, neatest, and friendliest little city in southern Louisiana, and they make a strong case.
If you did not grow up in Louisiana or had some background in French, the pronunciation of this Lafourche Parish town would be impossible.
When I was in the army, they would say, Thibodaux. You see, they couldn't pronounce the word at all.
I once heard somebody describe Thibodaux as a city of schools and churches and bars and lounges.
The origins of the Thibodaux way of life begins with Bayou Lafourche, a 100-mile stretch of water that forks off the Mississippi River in Donaldsonville and leads into the Gulf of Mexico. Thibodaux is roughly halfway down the bayou. It is known as the Queen City of Lafourche, as well as the town where yesterday welcomes tomorrow. We were welcomed by Thibodaux native Gibbons Robichaud.
Gibbons, what's in a name? How did Thibodaux get its name?
Henry Schuyler Thibodaux found him back in the early 1800s, yeah. He ended up over here, like all Spanish and French people, he ended up over here. And I think the Bayou Terrebonne and Bayou Lafourche is what attracted him and a lot of people to this area. There wasn't any sugar cane then, but they saw the value of the land where they could plant things, you know. And the two bayous for trade, and that's how Houma and Thibodaux came about.
And you know who Henry Schuyler is. He's kin, right?
Yeah. I wish I could have met him because he's my great-great-great-grandfather.
The town of Thibodaux also welcomed Spanish royalty, almost. Over 200 years ago, Queen Maria Luisa of Spain built Rienzi. Legend has it that this home was built as a retreat for the Queen during the French Revolution. The Queen did not move in, but it would later be the home to founder Henry Thibodaux. And back in those days of the early 1800s, Bayou Lafourche was a much busier and wider waterway.
This bayou, back in the day, was really the super highway of its day.
Right, exactly. If you talk about a bayou, they got plenty of bayous in Louisiana, but Bayou Lafourche is probably the longest and was the most popular. And when I take you to the cathedral, you're going to flip over because you're going to see things that they brought down on barges from Europe down the Bayou Lafourche for that cathedral. I mean, the pillars weighed 5,000 pounds apiece, and they came down the bayou.
The same year the Beatles debuted on Ed Sullivan, Gibbons Robichaud began playing at the St. Joseph Co-Cathedral. During those 43 years, Robichaud estimates he's played 1,500 funerals and about 500 weddings. This ornate sanctuary was considered the most expensive rural church in Louisiana, costing nearly $500,000 in 1920. This rose window in the rear of the church is modeled after the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris. Art, history, and Thibodaux come together with the help of painter Billy Ledet. His works of the Rienzi, as well as Cajun still life, can be seen at one popular Thibodaux eatery. Ledet loves bringing Thibodaux history back to life. What's not typical is Billy's way of showing off his grandchildren. Thanks to an idea from his wife, his 7 grandkids adorned the family dining room.
I would take pictures of the grandchildren when they were about maybe a year old or something like that, and do the cherubs' bodies and put their faces. And if you notice in the paintings, they go by the first one who's standing there with his arm up and he's got 1 finger, the next one has 2 fingers, 3 fingers, all the way down to our 7 grandchildren today.
Leday's work is also highly regarded outside of his family. When it came time for Nicholls State University to commission an artist to paint the first and only portrait of namesake Francis T. Nicholls, the school hired Leday.
Francis T. Nicholls was governor of Louisiana twice. The left arm missing in the portrait is from the time of the Civil War. Francis T. Nicholls was a Confederate general and fought in the Civil War and lost his left arm and part of his foot in the battle.
How many students attend Nicholls State?
Almost 7,000. We're now a selective admissions institution. We were previously an open admissions institution, and we draw students from Baton Rouge, Lafayette, New Orleans, that triangle.
Thibodeaux is home to Nicholls State University, first opened in 1948 as a 2-year institute. The school is sometimes referred to as Harvard on the Bayou. Nicholls State is the home to the John Folse Culinary Institute and has many distinguished alumni, including Julie Hebert, television producer of such acclaimed shows as ER and The West Wing, Barry Melanson, president and CEO of the 350,000-member American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, as well as actor and New Orleans radio personality John Spud McConnell.
And of course, having Nicholls just adds to it because we have cultural programs and sports, and I think it adds life and spice to the city of Thibodaux.
Thibodaux townfolk take great pride not just in their university, they also take pride in their families. They also hold dear to their religious heritage of all faiths.
And why you came down here? You came down here because you were fascinated with the name, right? Fascinated with the name. Now you're finding out why it's such a popular place.
Thibodaux has one of the largest volunteer fire departments in the country, and every spring they hold the Firemen's Fair and Parade that draws roughly 50,000 people. Every summer, hundreds of youngsters rush to Nicholls State University for the Manning Passing Academy, led by Archie Manning and his 2 NFL quarterback sons, Eli and Peyton. Next, we move on to a small, unassuming town in the northwest corner of Louisiana named Plain Dealing. Back in the 1830s, a Virginia family settled about 30 miles north of Shreveport and built a large plantation along the Red River. And just like the Red River, the 167-year-old story of Plain Dealing has its fair share of twists and turns.
In northwest Louisiana, there is a town full of plain-dealing churches and preachers, as well as plain-dealing police, even a plain-dealing business district complete with a plain-dealing tooth doctor. What else would you expect for a town known simply as Plain-Dealing, Louisiana? So what's in a name? For some answers, step inside for a little food for thought. Del, Kitty, and Annie Lou are more than happy to help.
Kitty, from what I'm hearing, you're a good local historian to the area. How did Plain Dealing get its name?
There was a Plain Dealing plantation that was called that after the plantation home of the Gilmers back in Virginia. And what we were told as children growing up, and this may be myth or legend, but the name Plain Dealing, we were told, referred to the fair treatment of slaves on the plantation.
George Gilmer, the man who built the Plain Dealing plantation in 1839, was also said to run his business in a plain dealing and honest manner. The plantation homes of George or that of his son James no longer exist. All that is left behind, a few black and white pictures of the son's plantation home known as Orchard Place. What does remain 167 years later is a small town of about 1,100 people that still hold true to their golden rule name. Every day of her plain-dealing life, Annie Lou Giles treats others the way she'd like to be treated from her downtown restaurant. The walls of this cafe are decorated with historic pictures and artifacts supplied by thankful customers over the years. Giles Snack Shop, also known as Annie Lou's by the locals, boasts some of the best home cooking in the state, featuring plate lunches, hamburgers, and awesome coconut cream pie. This is the place where plain dealing people greet, meet, and eat.
It's not that we have that big of a business, we just have the traffic. Everybody comes here, they may not eat or drink nothing, but they're gonna come visit. And some of them stay half a day. But that's fine, that's what I'm here for. I'm not here for just the dollar, I'm here for my friends because they mean everything to me.
This must be a great place to catch up on things.
Yes. And the men say the women gossip in the beauty shop, but they don't gossip like the men does in the coffee shop.
They can also talk about some of the wilder times. Right across the street from Annie Lou's is currently an insurance office. But back in 1933, gunshots rang out on February 6th at the First State Bank. Gang leader Charlie Frazier did not capture national attention like Babyface Nelson, but he and his gang did make headlines in plain dealing. Deputy J.L. Butler shot in the bank window and killed one of the bank robbers. Frazier was caught a few days later.
And from my understanding, someone happened to look in the bank window, through the window, and they saw the bank was being robbed. So a deputy was in town. Usually you can look around here now, you're going to see a deputy somewhere. I understand he was standing on the street. There was shots fired and the robbers came out.
But the story gets better. Charlie Frazier made a getaway and got lost.
And when they got turned around, they didn't know where they were at, but they came right back through town with the second shootout.
That's right. Charlie Frazier, with a poor exit strategy, got caught up in a second shootout in town before finally being caught a few days later in Caddo Parish.
But I remember going there and see one of the bandits was shot. Mm-hmm. And I remember looking through the plate glass window, and there was a little hole where the deputy sheriff had shot this bandit.
86-year-old Clark Strahan is a lifelong plain dealer, 7-handicap golfer, and retired. He worked 51 years in sales for a paper manufacturer in Shreveport. One of his secrets to success, he could tell people he was just a plain dealing salesman.
And I would go to conventions all over the United States, and I might be up in New York, and somebody would say, "Well, where are you from, Clark?" I'd say, "Well, I'm from near Shreveport." And they said, "Well, what's the name of your place?" I said, "Well, you never heard of it before, but it's from a little town called Plain Dealing." And boy, that would immediately get their attention.
Clark had another attention getter. Back in 1993, the Saturn Motor Company put out a sales brochure, and plain dealing was featured, along with other unusually named U.S. cities. The brochure featured Chance, Oklahoma, as well as Harmony, California.
They evidently were looking for towns with odd names, and certainly plain dealing qualified, because it is an odd name. It's the only town I ever heard of in the world named Plain Dealing.
Back at Annie Lou's, my new friends fill me in about another nearby community that could only happen in Louisiana. It's about another community located close to plain dealing.
It's a community called Swindleville.
What's that?
Swindleville. And I've always heard it was actually in Believe It or Not, Ripley's Believe It or Not, that there was a town called Plain Dealing, and a few miles south there was another town called Swindleville. Yeah. But there was.
Back in the early 1900s, Clark Strahan's father owned a dry goods store just outside of Swindleville, and Clark can vouch for the Swindle family.
And the Swindles were good people.
Yes, they were.
They weren't cheaters or swindlers.
No, that's right.
Swindles were good people.
They were real high-class people.
Plain dealing residents may relish the simple life, but there is nothing plain about the town cemetery.
These headstones were imported from Italy. They're marble. These are of the Gilmer family. The Gilmer family was the founders of the town of Plain Dealing, and their plantation sat right joining the cemetery here, so this land was donated from the Gilmers as a cemetery. I always think this is the founding fathers laying here. They are due all the respect. We wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for the Gilmers. You can walk around this cemetery and you're going to see there's people from everywhere. Lots of Texas people buried in here that lived here and then moved off and came back. If you ever lived here, you're probably going to be buried here. You always come back here to be buried.
It was true for the Gilmer family, one of the richest families in the country for their time. They made the old plantation property their final resting place. Right across the dirt path is another family plot.
They just got stuck with that name. They couldn't help that. Their last name was Swindle. It was not Swindleville. Swindleville came from their name and was put on the end and made a settlement or a small town south of Plain Dealing. As far as I know, and never heard anything different, the Swindles were really good people. And basically like the Gilmers, they helped lots of people.
Plain Dealing has some of the nicest people you will ever meet. And believe it or not, there was even a Wenham family in Plain Dealing that ran a dry goods store in the mid-1900s. But they spell their name differently from my family, so we don't think there's any relation. Nonetheless, people in Plain Dealing treat you like family. I hope you've enjoyed our storytelling with this edition of Lost Louisiana. By the way, back here in Opelousas, folks hold wonderful cemetery tours filled with all sorts of voices from the past. Proceeds from the tours fund the cemetery restoration project. I recommend you come on down this way if you have the chance. For everyone here at LPB, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again for another edition of Lost Louisiana. Such a beautiful historic cemetery. My goodness, look at this, Mark.